You know, there is a university of astrology learning in the Old Soul, New Soul podcast with Robert Glasscock. And now we created a free PDF of all the episodes by date and by title. We discovered that many of today's listeners have not heard these early episodes. So grab your free searchable list of all the show topics and take your astrology knowledge up a huge leap now. It's under the freebies tab on funastrology.com. Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller along with Robert Glasscock, and we have a question from a listener that came in, Robert, and I wanted to set this up for you that she was asking about where mom and dad show up in the chart. So typically, you've taught, Mark Edmund Jones teaches that the parent that you interact with most daily through the day is represented in the 10th house. Then the parent of last recourse, the just wait until your father gets home, is the 4th house. So typically in, the leave it to beaver structure, the mom would be reflected in the 10th house and dad would be reflected in the 4th. Well, this listener was basically saying that role in her home where she grew up was flipped. So mom was more the stronger voice and dad was more of the day-to-day contact. How does that play out then?
Great question, and it's become even more difficult with social evolution. What do you do with same-sex couples, for example, which were not common back in the days where the old astrology books were being written? And as with all these questions, ultimately it's subjective, and you're going to have to make your own decision, and the only way you can is by getting your hands on as many astrological books as you can, either online or real physical books, and experimenting with different charts to make up your own mind. In this listener's question, she made it sound like the mother was the parent of final recourse, which made me want to know who earns the money. Does your dad earn the money? Because you can have the dad being the primary breadwinner, and yet the mother seems to dominate the household. But in fact, if the dad loses his job, there is no household. So he is still, in that scenario, the parent of final recourse and ruled at the 4th house. Second of all, it takes two people to make a baby. And in the sex act, physiologically, it's the male who externally inseminates the womb of the female. So he provides the generative seed that starts the process of gestation, which then takes place for 9 months inside the woman. So archetypically, it is still the male who initiates that process. Now, the old theory that Mark Edmund Jones comes up with, which made the most sense to me, is that in real life, traditionally, the father's out every day earning a living, and the mother is the one that provides the day-to-day authority. Sends the kids off to school, is there when the kids get home. She disciplines them all throughout the day. But in fact, he is the final recourse in the cliche that you used. If the kid misbehaves and she can't do anything about it, she can always say, I'm going to tell your father when he gets home, meaning he's the parent of final recourse. So you have to think these things through. For example, if you have adoptive parents, then you may have a situation where this baby is living with her biological mother, but not living with her biological father. And those situations will often be reflected in the horoscope. You may have Pisces or Aquarius on the 4th cusp, for example, which can indicate something unconventional or unusual or even mysterious or hidden or secret about the father. You may have Neptune there. You may have any number of configurations that indicate something unconventional about the parentage. But the basic definition, which I did finally settle on because, like most people, I could read my mother in the 10th house, I could read my mother in the 4th house. But when I finally grasped what Mark Edmund Jones explained, and he still, to my money, does the best explanation of why each house rules what it does, not just simply saying, oh, this house rules that and that house rules this with no reasons. He gives you the reasons. He still does the best job of anybody I've ever read. And I then settled on the fourth house for my father, and in fact, it works very well in my chart. But in other people's charts, you can't just use your own. You have to practice these techniques and see what the results are that you get. And then decide, all right, this is what I'm going to use.
In this scenario, then, let's say that somebody has a Saturn aspect, or maybe Saturn is in the 10th house or has an aspect to the 10th. So, if you were interpreting that as the father's house and Saturn were aspecting it and you were trying to understand that better, that's a whole different deal than if still that's mother and yet you're looking at Saturn perhaps also reflecting father.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things I do use, Thomas, is health, physical health, because you can't argue. A person either has heart conditions or they don't. A person either has rheumatoid arthritis and joint problems or they don't. They either have lung problems or they don't, on and on. So you can look at the fourth house, let's say, for the father, and the 10th house for the mother, and then look at the sixth house from each of those. So the mother's sixth house in your chart is your third house. And you can then look at the sign on the third house, which is the health of the mother, and the planet that rules that house and the aspects it makes, and begin to ask questions about physical health, physical accidents. Has she ever had an injury to her left arm or her right arm? Those kinds of things. And the same with the father. His sixth house in your chart is shown at your ninth house. That's the sixth from the fourth. And that will show not only your father's health, but also what he does, his work. And you can begin asking questions that way. So there are a number of ways to approach this dilemma, which we all face. So the questioner is not alone in this confusion. But by thinking about it from several different perspectives, using derivative houses like that, and especially with physical health, you can absolutely decide for yourself which house rules which parent.
So you would never flip them?
Never.
Never?
Never.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. And I hope that was a good answer for our listener who was asking that question. Something we don't mention very often is that we have a whole store with Robert's materials in it. It's on the funastrology.com website. And you just go there and there's a Robert Glasscock section. So the webinars and his booklets that we probably don't mention enough on here, but he's written 4 booklets that are also available there. And if you'd like to pick those up, you can just go right to funastrology.com, and there they are. Hope you avail yourself of that. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Looking forward to it. Our next visit on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology podcast with Robert Glasscock.